Hey guys, we're here with Gizmo today, and we're just going to talk about the Gazelle platform and how to get the most out of the platform as it stands right now. We're going to talk about saturations, curves, the lack of curves, and just how to fly the aircraft and get the most possible enjoyment out of it. So, you flew the SA 341, correct?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So what was known as the HD2, which is what the Royal Naval Display Team flew.
And I know it was a while
Okay,
back,
boost
but if you
winches.
were to guesstimate, approximately how many hours did you have on that airframe?
Yeah, same amount. How
At
many think
90,
worth
95, yeah.
chasing
95.
rockets?
And
You guys
you
want to head
you
back to
flew
port?
it you flew it as part of training, correct?
On your lead.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, the Gazelle
Alright,
in the
coming
Royal
out. Got
Navy
you both
was
at the
it was part of basic flying training. It was like their initial
Yeah.
um, flight training helicopter.
Gotcha.
So what would happen is you join as a pilot in the Royal Navy, and during officer training, you would go to grading flight, which was 13 hours on an old Chipmunk, a de Havilland Chipmunk,
number
where you
4 is
did
on your right.
13 hours, which is where they ascertained whether or not you had the aptitude to be able to work in an air environment. If you passed that, you then passed out of officer training as a pilot, subspecialization pilot. So after RNEFTS, you then go down to Cold Rose to do 705 Squadron. We still exist as a squadron, but back in the day, it was back in my day, rather, which was 93 when I joined 705 Squadron. It was on the Gazelle, which is with basic flying training on the helicopter. At which point, when you graduated from there, you were graduated with your naval wings, and then you were streamed to either go to Lynx. You were either streamed to go to Drungly, which was the marine support role, or you went to anti-submarine warfare,
Gotcha.
and that's where I got my Gazelle time. Was on 705 Squadron.
So it's just a stepping stone.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It was part of the whole the Royal Navy flying training regime. But yeah, the Royal Navy only used it as a trainer.
All right, we're down on the road here, parallel to each other. I'm to his aft section, and Gizmo's just going to talk a little bit about how he was taught in flight school on the Gazelle to how to pull in collective and keep the aircraft from jumping off the ground. So, Gizmo, if you want to talk a little bit about that now, it's all you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So one of the things with I've heard about on obviously Discord and it's like various different Discord channels and stuff like that, and ED forums and stuff, is that people are experiencing that the Gazelle has a tendency to jump into the air. And it's just like that. You pull a little bit of collective and it just jumps into the air. Now, one of the things that we were taught in the flight school is that obviously this is a very light aircraft. I mean, 1,600, 2,000 pounds or 2,000 kilograms all up weight and stuff like that. So the way we were taught in flight school is that it would be a nice positive pull on the collective up to 40%. And then once you reach about 40%, which is skids light, what you'd be doing is you'd be gently, ever so gently, flying that aircraft into the air. And it was always a case of that you were flying the aircraft from the moment skids light, and that's the way it goes. And it's the same when you come to landing the aircraft as well. Is that it's a case of you spot your hover, gain your hover, and then it's a case of slowly lower, and you're flying it. Essentially, you are flying that aircraft all the way down until you are skids on the ground. So you're flying the aircraft from skids light all the way up to the hover, and then flying it all the way down. So it's a positive pull up to about 40%. and then ever so gently, because it's all about, the thing with the Gazelle is it's all about microcontrol. Yeah, it's all about very, very fine control. Because if you're super aggressive, if you kind of go, well, I'm going to take off and I'm going to pull in a load of collective, yeah, you will jump up. This aircraft is so easy to overcompensate on. If you're used to flying a Huey or used to flying a HIP, which is a heavy, heavy aircraft, where you can grab loads and loads of collective and 5% of torque doesn't really amount to much. You've got to bear in mind that this aircraft is so light and so agile that small amounts of torque increases have a huge amount of effect on the actual aircraft.
Right.
It's a two-stage pull. So pull to about 40% and then slowly increase. And it's a case of just ever so gently getting that aircraft into the air. And then you can hold it there. And it's always about the micromanagement of controls. I mean, I'm at the moment ever so gently adjusting everything. And then to set it back down on the ground, just a small amount, the finest amount. Bear in mind, I'm in ground effect here as well. I'm on the ground, lower the collective down, and I'm then set. If you pull handfuls of collective, all of a sudden, you're shooting up in the air, and then you're like, whoa, I don't want to be that far, and you overcompensate. You're shooting up, you drop the collective, and then before you know it, you're down, and then you're pulling collective, and then it's like you're doing the kangaroo thing. You can't be treating it like you're stirring porridge, as we used to call it. It's all about micromovement, which is why it was so good as a trainer in the Royal Navy, because it highlighted the people that didn't have the finesse.
And so on that note, you would also say that in terms of twitchiness, this is fairly accurate.
With regards to the collective, I'd say the collective is pretty much bang on.
Yeah.
As in the pull of the collective, where it bites, where the collective actually feeds in, and everything else like that. I'd say
Right.
the collective and the yaw pedals are pretty much bang on the money as to what I remember about the Gazelle. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so obviously we know there are some shortfalls cyclic-wise, but could the same be said for the cyclic in terms of the touchiness there?
Well, we'll talk about the cyclic in a little bit more detail a little bit later on, because the cyclic doesn't really behave in the way that you would expect it to behave.
Okay.
But talking about the collective and the yaw pedals or the torque pedals,
Right.
okay, they behave exactly as I would expect them to behave for a Gazelle.
Yeah. Okay.
Or any helicopter, but especially the Gazelle. You know, the fact that if you yank up on that collective, then you're going to be jumping up in the air. Of course you are, because it's a very light helicopter compared with everything else that's in DCS.
Right.
I mean, your UH-1 is probably, I mean, I don't know the figures, but you know, the UH-1, the HIP, and also the KA-50, you know, they're heavy aircraft.
Yes, very much so.
But the Gazelle is designed, you know, is a lightweight, observational, agile aircraft. So it is a very agile aircraft. So the collective is going to be very responsive, you know, and as a result of that, the yaw pedals are also going to be responsive as well. You know, the Fenestron is a very active thing. But we'll come into that because there's other things with the Fenestron as well. But the cyclic is the main thing that doesn't really, but the collective aspect to it. But it depends on how you're actually controlling it. You know, I mean, I've got a self-built, and I'll send some pictures over to you about what my collective is. But it's piggybacked off a potentiometer. That's
Right.
all it is. You know, so people can see what I'm actually using. At no time is the aircraft flying itself. You are constantly flying the aircraft. From the moment it goes skids off the ground to the moment that you put the skids back on the ground, you are always flying that aircraft.
Yeah, I would completely agree. There's not a moment that I spend flying this aircraft, aside from being an auto hover when I'm not bumping the cyclic or yaw control around, ever so minor movements too. Just to stay in this hover is, pretty taxing on the cyclic. Like it's little bumps, very little, minute.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but it's like trying to balance a ball on a stick.
Yes. Yep.
And it's like the smallest movement puts that center of balance off, and you've then got to regain it. But the moment you regain it, the ball starts to go off balance. You've got to counteract that balance away, but then regain it back.
Yes.
So it's like you counteract it and then get back to center. That's the way that this, and because it is so light, that's just the way that it works. With a heavier aircraft like the Huey or the HIP or the KA-50, it's a little bit more forgiving because the heaviness of the aircraft underneath the rotor blade allows you that margin of error with regards to the stick movement. But because the Gazelle is so light, you just need to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more. That requires that so much more finesse.
Right. Yeah, you've definitely got a lot more inertia and mass moving around with the Hippo, the Huey, and those types of aircraft, KA.
Well, it takes a lot more. If you tilt the disc forward on a heavy aircraft, it takes a lot more force for that aircraft to start moving forward. Or if you tilt the disc to the right or to the back, or whichever way.
Yeah.
But with the Gazelle, because it is so light, just a slight movement forward, and because it's so light, the thrust. Because don't forget, we're flying the Mike variant here, which has an uprated engine and also uprated blades to provide more lift and stuff like that. So it's going to respond a lot quicker than what I was used to, which was the 341. This is the 342, which had those uprated blades and the uprated engine, which provided more power, more lift, and everything else. So it's going to be a lot more responsive. But that being said, the 341 that I flew was still very, very, very agile and hyper sensitive to pilot-induced oscillations. So if you started to overcompensate quickly, you could find yourself hoovering up the whole of the airfield, moving around the whole of the airfield rather than just maintaining a single spot. So what we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about the way that the actual, forget about the collective, forget about the rudder pedals and everything else like that. Okay? We're going to talk about the cyclic, the way that the cyclic currently works within the Gazelle. Okay, so we're 150 kph here, straight and level at just over 1,200 feet. Okay, following this road here. Now the thing with the way that the actual cyclic works here, okay, is it behaves a lot more like a fixed-wing aircraft. Now what I mean by that is that the center is the trimmed position. Okay, so if you want to input something, you have to deflect it from center, and then to stop that input, you have to bring it back to center. So to demonstrate that, okay, I'm going to get it back up to 150 kph here. I'm going to put in a right cyclic input, and I'm just going to leave it there. And as you can see, it's just going to continue to roll until I correct it. And the same thing is that if I put within, back in there, trimmed out, okay, if I put in a small amount of left cyclic, and that's the smallest amount, okay, it's just going to continue to roll, continue to roll, continue to roll. It just keeps increasing the angular bank. And that's why the thing is with the cyclic on this module is that, and it's the same if I just put a small amount of aft, okay, I'm not increasing, but I'll just keep pitching up until I reach the stall speed, and then I can go into a hammerhead. And it's the same, okay, if I pitch nose down, okay, I'm just going to keep pitching nose down, nose down. So the actual cyclic actually behaves more like a fixed wing aircraft, And that is the main problem with why people struggle with the Gazelle. Now, you may be asking, well, how the hell can I control a rotary wing aircraft when it behaves like a fixed wing aircraft? Well, that's where saturation levels come in. So the thing is that now that we know how the cyclic actually behaves, we can actually start to understand how to control this aircraft and get some fun out of it. Because at the end of the day, we all know Polychep are going to start to be able, they're going to improve this, okay, with the release of the Kiowa. They're going to update the FM of the actual module, okay? And that's great. And I've got great belief in Polychop that they're going to do this. But how do we actually manage to control this aircraft? Well, it's all about controlling it, understanding that when you make a movement with the cyclic, you need to, if you've gone too far, you need to return it back to center. And you think to yourself, well, hang on a minute. Well, I'm at 100%. Most people that I know are at 100%. They should be at 100%. That's what most people's. I don't fly at 100% saturation. My pitch and my roll are at 60%. Why am I pitch and roll at 60%? Well, the reason that my pitch and roll at 60% is because I'm flying on a short stick. Okay, I've got a VKB NXT, no extensions or anything. And if you imagine that you've got a 6-foot pole in the ground and you want to get some sort of deflection on it, if you hold it near the top and you want to get 30 degrees deflection on it, you've got to move that top of that stick a huge amount. However, if you hold it near the ground, which is where my point is, then what I'm doing is I'm actually moving it probably about 6 inches. So that's where saturation levels can come in and make this aircraft a lot more enjoyable, because what it does is it enables you to be able to enjoy the aircraft despite the frailties in its flight model, despite the frailties in the cyclic movement. You can still enjoy it and still get the best out of it utilizing those saturation levels.
Yeah.
So what I've done is I've actually reduced my saturation levels down to 60%. And to be perfectly honest with you, at 60% on my HOTAS, which, as I said, is an NXT, VKB NXT, premium right hand, that gives me the right feel for what I remember the twitchiness of that aircraft to be. So when I pull up on my collective, and I've not adjusted my collective at all. Okay, my collective is still at 100%, but my cyclic is adjusted down to 60%. And the reason for that is so that if I make a movement with my cyclic rather, if I get a slight movement to the left, I'm able to adjust it to the right and center it to stop that movement.
Right.
And that's the way the Gazelle works at the moment.
Right. And I just want to clarify, I myself, and I think you as well, Gizmo, don't believe you should be putting curvature into the roll and pitch, because you're defeating the linearity of the line there, and it just makes the movements more drastic and a little bit more unpredictable.
If you start to put curvatures in, it's essentially you're putting in an exponential curve, which means that the more that you move it, the more you're actually moving it, if that makes sense. So,
right,
you move it by X amount and it's X squared.
Right.
And that's what an exponential curve means. You want it to be a linear movement.
Yeah.
What you don't want is to suddenly be faced with, well, I've moved it so much, and then all of a sudden I've moved it half the amount again, but I've got twice the movement. It should always be about just maintaining. So as I said, I mean, I'm sat at 60% on the short stick. If you've got a slight, but the thing is with the the saturation curves is that it's a preferential thing.
Yeah.
Only
Definitely.
you will know about what your perfect setting is. I mean, I'm talking about what my recollection is of flying the Gazelle. And I'm sat in her hover here now, talking to Sly, facing me. And I know that these saturations are absolutely perfect to what I remember the Gazelle to fly like. The amount of movement that is recalled
Right. Yeah.
with regard to the cyclic. Not everybody has that. And this is where I'm trying to come from with this, is that, if you want to get the closest that you can, if you've got what I've got, which is an NXT, okay, with a VKB pedals, with your own self-built mod collective, okay, then yeah, 60% for you on the cyclic is perfect. Set up as I've got it. However, everybody has their own little setup. They've all got their own little way of doing it. So what I would suggest is that most people start out, when they get the Gazelle, is start out at 50% and then work it out from there so that you can enjoy this Gazelle. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. We fly in a simulated environment. It's not about, well, is it exactly as the module? Yeah, I've got it pretty much down to what I remember. But I've also flown other aircraft. I've flown the Huey, and the Huey doesn't, I don't have any saturations on the Huey. But also, if I flew the Sea King, that Razvan might be, it could be completely different.
Right.
Because every aircraft has its own feel.
Yeah. So
But
myself, for example, in regards to personal preference as well, obviously I've never flown a Gazelle in real life. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like, but I have a longer stick and I can fly effectively on 100%. However, I find for comfort reasons, I bring it down to 80% just because at 100%, if I bump my cyclic, I obviously don't have a magnetic brake on this thing, so it's just gonna flop down because there's no spring return in the cyclic that I use. So I find 80% is pretty comfortable for me and can withstand a little light bump if I accidentally knee it or something. I can still
yeah,
recover from that,
yeah. But the thing is you're operating on a 50 centimeter extension, isn't it?
I don't know the exact number. I'll look it up
No.
and throw it up on
But
screen.
you're flying with an extension, so therefore the amount of movement that you've got at the top of your extension
Right.
is
Yes.
a lot less than what I'm expecting.
Yes. Completely
But
true.
so it's individual. But the thing is, it doesn't make it any less enjoyable. There's nothing wrong with what we can do with the aircraft. It's all relative.
Right.
It's about how you control it. And the most important thing with the Gazelle is that you need to understand that if you put a right cyclic input in, it's going to continue to roll. You need to correct that. The central point, the point of balance, is always in the middle. So it's more about trying to understand about how the actual cyclic works. And if you can understand how the cyclic works, it will give you better control over how the Gazelle works and how to better enjoy the Gazelle. And that comes down to saturation. Especially if you're on a short stick, you set it in motion and then center the stick, and it maintains that motion until you oppose that motion, which is not how a helicopter works. But then Polychop are going to sort that out. But this is more about how can you enjoy the Gazelle
As it stands right now.
as it stands and still enjoy it, especially with the freebie time that we've been offered.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, the first thing is that obviously the flight model, which we're not really talking about here, but the cyclic inputs are not based around a real helicopter. They're based around more a fixed wing input model. And if you can wrap your head around that and adapt your flying, then you can still enjoy this model. The second thing that we've learned is the fact that if you can wrap your head around the fixed wing kind of input of a cyclic, and not focus purely on the fact that well, it doesn't behave like a helicopter when I put the cyclic in such a position, then you can still enjoy it. It's about enjoying this module. And the thing is Polychop have said they're going to update it, and that's the thing. This is all going to change in hopefully months time as the Kiowa is released and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the final thing, hopefully, that people have learned is that depending upon their HOTAS, saturation levels are there to deal with the twitchiness. As I've said before, I mean, I've got experience on the real life Gazelle, and with my HOTAS setup, I mean, I've got a set of rudder pedals or torque pedals. I've built my own little collective, which you've got a picture that I'm sure you're going to show in the video and stuff like that.
Yep.
And with the saturation level, with my HOTAS set at 60%, I get a real feel for the aircraft as it was. Okay? But the thing is with the Gazelle, because it's such a light little aircraft, it is all about micro controls. It's not about ham-fisting it all over the place. You've got to keep those cyclic controls and also the collective controls and the rudder pedals. It's all about micro movements to be able to keep us. I mean, like we are here. We're facing each other. I'm not in auto hover. I hope you're not in auto hover.
No.
Okay, and stuff like that. But we're able to maintain it.
Yeah.
And it's just about dialing in what's right for you. Now, if you've not flown the helicopter in real life, you won't have a reference point. And if you've not got a HOTAS set up like mine, you won't have, if you set 60%, it may not be exactly as I would expect, but it'll be pretty close to what you can expect the twitchiness, the micro control movements that you need to keep this aircraft in a nice and stable hover.
Yeah.
But it's at the end of the day, yes, we all know that this flight model at the moment isn't great. Polychop have promised to fix it with the Kiowa when they update the Kiowa, because they've been working hard on the Kiowa flight model. And I can't wait to see what flight model is going to be, because this aircraft with a proper flight model is just going to be amazing. And people talk about the Gazelle, it's going to be superseded by the Kiowa because the Kiowa's got the Hellfire, it's got the ability to range from 8 kilometers. But there'll still be a role for the Gazelle.
Yeah,
for
I
me
agree.
Especially, but then I've got a vested interest in the Gazelle because I flew it real life, and that's what I'm in DCS for. I don't have any other modules because I want to fly the helicopter I flew. If they release a Sea King, I might be tempted. But yeah, it's one of those. It's a great little helicopter to fly. It's not perfect, but hey, what in life is perfect?
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in regards to like ham-fisting it, you said, so that's very true. You definitely can't move the cyclic very much. I mean, just to stay in this hover right here, I'm barely touching it. And I've had friends come over to my apartment and try to fly the Gazelle, and they obviously they don't have much of a reference for flying helicopters to begin with, but I tell them, like, if you're moving your arm, you're moving too much. Like, you need to just push that thing with your finger.
Well, exactly. And it also depends. I mean, you've seen my HOTAS set up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've set the chair up, and I've got my my cyclic is pretty much set. So I've got my right forearm resting on my right leg.
Yeah, same here. I rest my forearm on my leg as well.
And that is how all real-life helicopter pilots fly. They don't fly with the stick, where their arm is resting. It's a support thing, because
arm weight.
everything, it's all done through finger movement, micro controls. It's one of those. It's always been that way, even in a bigger aircraft. So if you're flying off a desktop or a desk, and you're sat and your HOTAS is on top of a desk and you're trying to fly it from that point, you're going to struggle anyway.
Yeah.
So it may be that in order to survive or to be able to get the best out of the Gazelle or any helicopter or any aircraft, you want to set your simulated pit up as best or as close to possible as what the real thing is. It's about looking at what your HOTAS setup is and adapting it so that at the end of the day, this is a game. And we want to be able to enjoy it. And the Gazelle, if you can set it up correctly and get it to a point where it's correctly set up, you can enjoy it. You can do the stuff that it can be done.
Yes.
360 turns and pivots and all the rest of this sort of fun stuff. And right, well, listen, thanks very much for listening, guys. Thanks, Sly, for making this video.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you all listening. And hopefully it's been fun for you, and hopefully it will enable everybody to be able to enjoy the Gazelle. And as I said, as long as you are able to maintain and set it up for what you want, then hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it. Anyway, see you later, guys.
Yep. Thanks for watching.
Okay, enjoy.